talk trolley for Whistle Stop. It would be a perfect platform for a performance, and it would be a way for folks to still be outside without the confines of, like, real walls, and at the same time, easy for people to get on and off if they wanted to actually get out. And so that's something that might help.
I'm going to jump in just because please follow up with me. That's exactly the kind of thing. And I love that you did an audit, you did an assessment. Even thinking about it is awesome, because now you're going to be able to help give information, and now you're brainstorming on how you can include everybody. That's where it starts. And I've got some ideas. I'll follow up with you. Just as today, if you followed Dick's Park over in Raleigh, that's an amazing space, and they've got a sunflower. These sunflowers bloom, and it's beautiful, and you go there and you take your selfies. It's amazing. But they haven't thought about how people can get around that. And so it's just that conversation of let's start thinking about that. It's a undeveloped park with a lot of wooded trails, but they're thinking, hey, wait a minute, we're inviting everybody to come to this. We need to think how everybody could enjoy this. So I would love to support you in that, and just kudos for you're doing the work, though. You're thinking about it, and you're brainstorming, and you're going to come up with some good ideas. And we can help you with that.
Thank you. I will.
Right.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah. Well, one other, that's what I was going to ask. I need you to give your website so folks can get in touch with you. And then if you do that real quickly, and then I also need to bring in, I believe I heard one more bell, which would have been Sonya Pfeiffer, so I need to bring her into the conversation as well. But if you could give us the website, please.
Yeah, so it's just Arts Access, the word ArtsAccessinc.org. And if you do Arts Access North Carolina, it will pop up. And we got a bunch of stuff coming up in Durham. We've got some workshops on dance. We've got a teaching artist workshop and another event at North Star Church of the Arts. But I'll follow up with folks. And thank you guys. This is awesome. I'm really glad to know about these powerful conversations you're having. So thank you.
No problem. Glad to invite you. Definitely, if you could stay on, I know you said you might have something that you had to jump off, but if you could stay on, it would be appreciated. But if you have to go, I understand. But, Dean, can we bring in Sonya Pfeiffer?
We sure can. Sonya, you are now online with Straight Talk with Dina Mark.
Hey, good evening. It's Sonya.
How are you doing, Sonya? I'm so glad that you could join this conversation. As you can tell, we're talking about arts and advocacy and things of that nature. I first learned about you when you were a TV reporter here in the area. You're now gone on to become a lawyer as well as a art gallery owner. So I'm just trying to figure out how you made these great transitions, because like I said, when I first remember seeing you on the TVs locally, you were a TV reporter. And then, like I said, there was major trials and other things that happened around the community. You got out of that and became a lawyer, and now you're doing a lot of stuff, including some advocacy work. I remember when we talked briefly earlier, just in a warm-up conversation, you mentioned that you just had an exhibit, I believe, that dealt with folks coming back from military conflicts and the art as being a part of that and what y'all were doing with that.
Yeah, we did. So first, just to respond to the previous conversation you were having about art and disability and advocacy, the show I had mentioned was called, it was in November of last year, and it was called Vicarious, and it was about using empathy to understand the lives of veterans, of veteran families. It was about exploring these ideas that many of us are not connected to because we haven't had an individual experience with being a veteran, with serving or service. And I think that anytime we don't have a personal experience, we end up creating this space between us. And so it's difficult to understand or empathize with another when you feel like there's space. And so in that regard, we not only had some fine artists who were not necessarily veterans themselves, but doing work around these issues of empathy, of the veteran experience, but we worked with a group called Creative Vets. And Creative Vets just focused on using music and to heal, and veterans who are coming back from service, whether in combat or otherwise, often come back with significant issues that are difficult to handle when you try to transition into civilian life. And there's plenty of research and proof that the arts can be healing and the arts can really help people process some of these psychological issues. So whether we're talking about PTSD or whether we're just talking about a transitional period that's difficult, Creative Vets finds a way to use the arts to help these veterans transition. And the sort of common theme, to answer your question about how did you move around so much from being a reporter back in 2000, 2003, that's when I was up in the Triangle, and then subsequently went to a TV station in Boston and continued to report through 2007 when I finished law school. The common thread through all three of my careers now is storytelling and the power of storytelling. As a reporter, I think it's pretty easy to understand how it is that you craft stories, that you tell stories, that you hope to educate or entertain or enlighten in some way. And I found that as I got to the end of that career, when I was up in Boston reporting and anchoring there, while also in law school, by the way, in North Carolina, so coming to law school during the week at Chapel Hill, and then flying up to Boston on weekends to report and anchor, I noticed a shift in journalism, particularly television journalism, away from really in-depth, meaningful reporting where reporters and producers had time and the resources that were necessary to do really good investigative reporting, to being a lot shorter and more of sort of under this headline of crime, traffic, and weather. And I felt as though that was, in short, a real wasted opportunity. I think that local television has an incredible opportunity to do those things I just said, to educate, to entertain, to enlighten, to really help people know what is going on in their community. And when we begin to cut it down into these bite-sized pieces that are 20, 30, 40 seconds and revolve around things like crime, traffic, and weather, we lose out on a lot of that important storytelling. Because I had done a lot of investigative reporting during my journalism career of about 12 years, I gravitated toward law school. I realized that I liked covering stories that dealt with lawyers, that dealt with the workings of the criminal justice system. And I actually thought by going to law school, what I'd do is become a legal reporter. My first year of law school, I went there thinking this is what I need to do to step away from this daily reporting of crime, traffic, and weather and get back into something more meaningful. And so that was my goal until I got to law school. And I did something called the Public Defender Mentor Project at Carolina. And I also started working on the Innocence Project. And it became very clear to me very quickly that telling stories in the courtroom was the place where I could make a real difference. And so I probably spent 3 months considering still getting a law degree and going back into television news, but by winter break, I was sure that I was going to be a reporter. I was no longer going to be a reporter. I was going to be a lawyer, and I wanted to be a public defender. And so that's what I did when I finished in 2007. And I continue to practice law now. Go ahead.
And you actually brought up an interesting point, which is actually, and it'll shift the conversation a little bit, but not totally. It's something that my dad brought up to me on Facebook and everything. It was a post that he made, and he's an artist, by the way. But he was wondering, and I was wondering if you thought the same thing, because I actually think that he may have a valid point. He was wondering that if we look at issues that are important, and I'm actually thinking about like the whole gun control issue and things of that nature, because that's what he was responding to, was that if we actually went back to old school reporting, and then, yes, they were graphic, but the old school reporting actually mobilized people, because his argument was that part of the reason that the Vietnam War stopped was because we saw those scary images, like the gentleman that was shot in the street, as well as like the fire bombs and all of that kind of stuff. And you can even argue the same thing with the civil rights and the hosing, but that reporting has gotten away from that. We hear about like the mass shooting that happened recently, but we don't see anything physically in front of us. And he's afraid that that's why we have this kind of laissez-faire kind of attitude toward when we hear these things. And I was just wondering if you think he has a point.
Well, I certainly think he has a point. I think it's a little more nuanced than that, however, because we do still have a lot of images, and now a lot of video that we see comes from people who are not in the role of reporter or journalist. I mean, one thing that I think is fantastic is that we have cell phones that now capture and show the world things that many people have known have been going on for a long time. As a criminal defense lawyer for more than a decade, of course, I was well aware of what was happening to my, generally speaking, minority clients on the street. And now suddenly you have cell phone videos that are opening the eyes of people who can't imagine that would occur. Now, the problem is that because there is so much of it occurring, and because we now have so much of this video, you end up desensitizing people because it's almost, you brought up mass shootings. I think that's a great example, right? When Columbine happened, we were all floored. And then it continued to happen in a variety of other places. And then even by the time we had Sandy Hook, where there were young children who were killed by a gunman, it's almost as though we see so much of it, we become desensitized. Now, I think if the images are accompanied by very good reporting with facts and data, I think then your father is right that you need to see these images, but you also need to understand these images. And the more we get away from an important and true narrative with those photographs or with that video, we put ourselves in this place where it's very easy to begin to think it's commonplace and to be less proactive and to be more complacent. I think it's a real worry. And I think part of it, yes, might be that reporting has changed, but I think that there's more to it, especially with our attention as a society being as short as it is.
Yeah, that's very true. And I was just wondering, and this is for everybody on the line and everything, but it seems to me that one of the things that is very important in our society is the tool and the idea of art as a means of being part of the reporting pool. Yes, we have reporters, and I consider myself a reporter. I've got a journalism degree from Marquette, definitely do this podcast, and definitely consider myself in that realm, but I'm also an art advocate, art administrator, different kinds of art roles. But it seems to me that in this modern day and times, the art is playing a very vital role in making sure that the true narrative gets out. Because a lot of times we don't hear the true narrative until after whatever the art version is. Dean, at the beginning, before y'all even came on, mentioned the movie about the Central Park case up in New York. And I don't know whether we would know as much about that if we didn't see that movie image, or we would stick with the old narratives of what existed or what we were originally told.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from my perspective, that's the power of art. It's really another language. What I'm doing at the gallery really works hand in hand with what I do as a criminal defense and civil rights lawyer. It's just finding different ways to address these topics, because when you are a criminal defense lawyer and you want change within the system and you are constantly talking with the same people about the same problems, you come up with same or similar solutions. When we see change, that's when you get yourself outside of the system. So from my view, talking about art and using art as this vehicle for discussion around big, important, challenging topics is storytelling at its most powerful. You and I can look at a work of art and see vastly different things, or maybe the same thing. We might come to that piece of art with vastly different life experiences and have a certain opinion about one thing that can change, or we can engage in a conversation in a non-threatening way. And particularly at the art gallery, it's in an environment that's also non-threatening. You're surrounded by beauty, by an object, a thing that another human being has created with her or his hands. And that lends itself to conversation, that lends itself to storytelling. I think that lends itself to a real purity of conversation about issues that can otherwise challenge us if you're sitting in City Hall or something like that.
Definitely. And Aya, how would you comment on the whole concept of art as a tool for actual making social change? Because I know some of your artwork, not just is historical, but it's also about social change.
I guess I can't say anymore how important being of the community, being a voice of the community. And so, even in my own work, my own content is in conflict with itself, because there is no one narrative. And so I'm representing as many sides of the story, and I really appreciate the emphasis on stories that I can. And it's a place where I think people can hear their perspective amplified, even if they don't agree with other perspectives that are projected. Like, at least I am working hard to be inclusive of everyone's voice as I learn about them.
And what about you, Teli? Would you agree with that, or would you want to